If you're thinking about buying property in Southern Oregon, it's really, really important to get it right because there's so many things that could go wrong, okay? And that's exactly why I'm gonna show on this video exactly the types of properties that you should probably avoid because there are a lot of them out there, okay? So we're gonna walk through an area here that is undergoing development, okay? There's a lot of various lots for sale in this neighborhood, beautiful neighborhood. But it's a good reminder of just kind of what to look out for when you're looking at buying property, okay? Because there's so many different things, like I said, that can go wrong. So we're gonna cover some of those things for you here in this video. Make sure you're taken care of and make sure that you've got all the information you need to make sure you do a good investment. So the first type of property for you to be aware of is just properties that lack legal access, okay? So what that is like a property that's landlocked, okay? So I'm thinking about, you know, more in like rural types of situations, properties that just have no road to them, no driveway, okay? The neighboring property blocks your access to the road. So in those cases, you either need to have an easement or you need to have your own actual road frontage. And there's times where that doesn't exist. So let's say if, you know, I owned a property next to yours and then you sell me yours, and I remove the easement that maybe used to exist, and then I go try to resell that property at some point down the road. Now there's all of a sudden no legal access to that property, and that's a big problem. So that leaves you as a buyer of said property to try to figure out how to actually get access to it. And that can be really, really tough to do because you're gonna have to talk to the neighbor and try to sweet talk them or buy your way, you know, into having an easement or something. So not a good situation there. Properties that do not have legal access. That's definitely something you want to avoid. The next one is going to be properties that have some sort of unresolved zoning issue, okay? So that could be a zoning issue, it could be a violation, is typically what those are going to be referred to as. But what we're talking about there is properties that, like this beautiful home behind me here, maybe let's say they built too close to the property line, okay? Probably not the case because this is, you know, kind of more in town, but in rural settings, you might have a property where you know, somebody built a shop or added a bathroom or did something that created a violation of zoning or of just code in general. And you, as a buyer, could be the one that is on the hook for resolving that violation, okay? You can have situations where there's a cabin, let's say, or a home or outbuilding of whatever sort that's built too close to the property line or, you know, unpermitted. And then the county gets involved and they discover that all of a sudden it is, you know, the building is actually, you know, within the setbacks, too close to the other property. And they say, hey, that building has to be removed, okay? So imagine that, if you buy a property and you didn't get it surveyed, you didn't do any of the things you needed to do, and all of a sudden you come to find out that you have to remove an outbuilding or the house itself or try to go and negotiate with the neighbor to figure out how to actually resolve the situation. So those are definitely ones that you want to avoid, is properties that have any sort of zoning violation or you know, other code violation. You definitely want to avoid those. Next up is pretty obvious really, and that's gonna be properties that are in some sort of like high risk zoning. So in Southern Oregon, we get properties that have high fire risk sometimes. If they're further away from a fire department, like 10 miles plus from a fire department, those can get, you know, labeled as being very high risk for fire. But there's ways around, not really around that, but there's ways to kind of help mitigate that a bit. So, but that's something that is worth, you know, being aware of, is making sure you're not buying in a, you know, in a flood zone where you have, you know, maybe you're in the 100-year flood zone, something like that. You probably want to avoid. Also slides, any other kind of geological hazard like that. But earthquake stuff is kind of not really common here in our area. But really the big one, like I mentioned, is fire here in Southern Oregon. So you'd want to make sure that you're buying places that, or you're looking at places that you know the fire risk, because that's something that can be pretty bad. So that's our biggest kind of natural disaster that we deal with here, is these wildfires that can come through. But thankfully, that's something that actually seems to have been improving over the last few years, where we haven't had as many big wildfires and big smoky summer days. Like if you look right now, it's August, and you can see clear across the valley. There's no smoke anywhere out there. It's really beautiful. But anyways, that's something to get back on track here. That's something you want to be aware of. Is I would suggest probably not buying properties that are in big hazard zones like that. Next up on the list is going to be properties that have insufficient water rights. Okay, so that is going to be somewhere that, let's say you have big garden or big lawn that you want to water, or whatever the case is, an orchard, and the property lacks the sufficient water rights to be able to do that. Okay, and that is something that can definitely be a problem, because what you're allowed to do in Oregon is irrigate a half of an acre. All right, and that's just with whatever, if you have a well or whatever it is, you can irrigate half an acre. If you have more than that to irrigate, you have to have water rights. Otherwise, you could get yourself into some trouble with stealing water and that kind of stuff. And that's something that the state of Oregon does take pretty serious. So you want to make sure that you definitely have the sufficient water rights for what you plan to do with the property, what you intend to do with it. And of course, that's something I could help you figure out if you're looking to buy or sell here in Southern Oregon. Fifth thing on the list is property that has just some sort of like unresolved easement or boundary dispute. And we've talked about this in some of our other videos, but properties that have unresolved boundary issues are a big problem. And it's really hard to actually figure out whether or not a boundary issue exists unless you get a survey. Okay, so a survey is definitely the easiest way to get that figured out. And because a surveyor looks at not just where things are at physically, like on the ground, they find the pins and do all that kind of stuff, and they look, but then they also will go back and they'll look at the deed descriptions, and they can discover, and this happened to me, a deed overlap, where maybe my deed says that our property line is right here, and your deed says that the property line's 20 feet onto my property, right? And so then you get into an issue where you're kind of having to figure out, well, whose deed's right, who supersedes who. You get attorneys involved, and things start to get pretty expensive pretty quick. So that's something you definitely want to avoid if you can. Next up would be land that is just too remote, or I'll even lump into that just has some sort of like a weird, unique thing going on with it that other people might not be very interested in, right? Because that affects resale value. Okay, and so if we were to stick with the too remote idea, that's typically, not many people are wanting to be extremely remote, right? So you're more than 45 minutes from the grocery store or the hospital or places like that, right? People tend to want to be 30 minutes or less from those types of facilities. So you get outside of that, you start to really limit the amount of people that are going to be interested in buying, and that really affects your resale value. Okay, so that's something that's big. Similar to that would be properties that are, on a main road, right? So they're on a really busy street, and maybe you have a lot of road noise, or properties that have more of like an unsightly neighbor, somebody who has a junkyard or something like that going on in their yard, or a bunch of livestock or a bunch of pigs that smell, stuff like that, right? So things that other people are going to come in and be like, what, this place just, I don't know if I can get past that, right? Those are things you want to consider when you are buying property. You want to make sure that it's something that other people are going to enjoy, because at the end of the day, like if it's your dream property and you're planning to die there and everything, it's like that matters less. But if it's something that you intend to resell at some point, even if it's 20 years down the road, those things still matter. Okay, you can enjoy your property all you want, and that's great, but I would always encourage you to keep in mind, is it something that other people are also going to enjoy and see value in? Another type of property to probably avoid is properties that have a super high development cost. Okay, so if you see where we're at here up on this hillside, you can see that this is going to be, it's already all kind of cut in here. And you can see like the house over there, they've done a lot of work in terms of bringing in dirt and all that kind of stuff. These are all going to be pretty typical, right? If you got into ground that was like significantly steeper than this, or went down a ravine on one side or something like that, you can start to get into places where you're going to have really high development costs just to be able to build your home, okay? And same thing can happen if you're looking at a place that has, maybe you have to put a big long driveway in, or you have to bring utilities in a long ways, because it might end up that, the nearest, power is somewhere that's a longer ways away, or they may require you to do some sort of upgrading to the vault or whatever that's nearest, or the transformer. You might have to do that. You might have to go underground, all sorts of stuff like that can be significantly expensive and unforeseen. And so you really want to try to look into like the possible and potential development costs as much as you can before you buy a property, because that's something that can definitely change things. If you were planning on spending, $400,000 or $500,000 on your project, and you pay $100,000 for your property, and now all of a sudden you have $200,000, to get all in and get all your utilities in and cut your pad and everything, that doesn't leave you with much to be able to actually build your house and do all the things that you want to do. So I really would encourage you to think twice about buying places that are going to have really high development costs. And those tend to be places that are on, steep hillsides, long driveways, more remote, further away from utilities, or even places that are in town that you have to tap back into like a main sewer water line. Like that can also be really, really expensive too. So keep all that in mind and try to get all that, like the time to be able to discover all that. Try to get that into like your due diligence period. So on a vacant piece of property where you think you might have some, some things like that come up, you're going to want to ask for more like 20 business days rather than the typical 10 days. So that would be my suggestion. Another one would be land that's in a restricted or a protected area. Okay. And that's going to be harder to do anyways, but there are places where, you have like a historic district, or like on the Rogue River, there's the wild and scenic section that has some restrictions on what you can and can't do with the land, and like what color you can and can't paint your house and those sorts of things. So that's all stuff I would just, again, I'm not saying you should never buy in those places, but I think you should definitely think twice about that, because again, like the appeal to other people, and also just making sure that like what exactly you can and can't do with the property. So that's all pretty important stuff. So yeah, try to avoid the areas that are going to be more restrictive and protected in those senses. And historic districts are awesome, great in terms of like the preservation of the older homes and buildings and stuff that are there, but stuff that you definitely want to know what you can and can't do. Because if you are really interested in like the modern or contemporary architecture and you want to build a house like that, and then come to find out that you can only build Victorian or craftsman style homes because of the historic district, well, that's going to definitely rain on your parade, and it'd certainly be better to figure that out before you buy the house or the property. And we're getting to the end here. We have two more property types that you should probably avoid, and the one second to the last one here is land without a real like feasible building plan. So that'd be property that's just going to be really steep and just has like maybe has a wetland or something near it, or like if you look behind me here, maybe this property has a ravine and it's protected or something like that. Those types of properties where you're only going to have a very small building window are going to be tougher to build on, to build a house of size, and it's going to be very restrictive in terms of what you can and can't do in terms of like a footprint on the property. So stuff again that I would just be very, very careful about. You may want to avoid those. You should certainly make sure you're very familiar with what you can and can't do with those, but could be something that you end up wanting to avoid altogether. And the last, but certainly not least, is the properties that have hidden costs. Okay, so that's a big one. There's always hidden fees and hidden costs with just about everything these days, it seems like. And so properties that have hidden costs can definitely be a big downer and something that you want to avoid. So I would definitely do your research on all of the potential costs and stuff on the properties. So things like HOA fees, things like any sort of possible lien that may exist against the property, that can all be figured out, on a preliminary title report, hopefully. Stuff like that could just be unforeseen, that could come up and cause, a bunch of costs that you just really didn't anticipate having. So you definitely want to avoid those types of properties, so you don't get sucked into some sort of, endless money pit that's going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars to resolve. And same thing could be said for properties like that maybe have, major issues. Like if you're buying a property that had a septic system on it, maybe had an old mobile home or something on the property, and they removed that, but it still has, a well and septic. What if the septic system is bad, right? Like, should you avoid the property, or should you just make sure that, you know what you're getting yourself into and you negotiate correctly when you find that stuff out? So if that's something you're interested in doing, that's something I love to do, would be to help you negotiate that all correctly and to get a property that you can really make a good return on and be happy in for a lot of years in building your house. So if that's something you're interested in doing, give me a call at 541-954-7758. I'm Brian Simmons with the Buying Southern Oregon Real Estate team here in Southern Oregon. So if you like what you saw in this video, go ahead and check out some of my other videos that are all about Southern Oregon. You can find a huge amount of videos, all stuff, good stuff about Southern Oregon, stuff that nobody else is telling you about Southern Oregon, the bad stuff, the good, the bad, the ugly, the whole thing. So check those out and go ahead and reach on out if there's anything I can do to help you learn, buy, or list real estate here in Southern Oregon. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.